and Paul Morrissey. Not only did they remember, but Morrissey pointed Joe in the direction of someone who wasn't in the photo, someone who wasn't part of the factory. Richard Extract. It was at this point that Joe realized his Warhol self-portrait wasn't the only one of its kind in existence. There were others. I went to meet the mysterious Mr. Extract.
So that's it?
That's my Andy Warhol.
When did you first realize that it wasn't an Andy Warhol?
No, it's always been an Andy Warhol as far as I'm concerned.
No, it isn't an Andy Warhol.
Well, so I'm told. However, in my judgment, it will always be an Andy Warhol. And since it was a gift to me from Andy, it's particularly special. And since it was part of a seminal moment in art history, it seems to me it's more important than a lot of other Andy Warhol works.
That seminal moment in art history was something that Joe Simon was about to stumble upon in his quest to authenticate his painting. It's crucial to remember that at the time Joe's self-portrait was made, Warhol had publicly announced that he'd given up painting altogether in favor of filmmaking, which, according to him, was easier.
You don't have to do anything. Just what you're doing.
At this time, Andy was selling or trading his art in order to finance his filmmaking, turning the Silver Factory into his own wayward alternative to the Hollywood studio system.
Gee, okay, start, huh?
Richard Extract was a publisher with connections to a new medium, the first domestic video camera.
How come your camera doesn't make any noise?
Andy was making underground movies, and he wanted to make underground, so-called underground videotapes. And he said, would you be able to get me a loaner for this? And I need a color camera and a black and white camera and lots of tape because I'm going to make all these underground videos. And so I arranged to get Andy all this material that he wanted. And I told him I thought it was good for Phillips, good for us, good for Andy. When he had his videotapes made, we'd have the world premiere someplace underground. And he called that summer and said, oh, I made the videos, and where are we going to have the party? And it turns out that this was the first showing of video art by a video artist ever.
Andy gave an interview to Extract's trade magazine, Tape, to help publicize the collaboration. He also proposed embellishing the party with some of his art. And so, the contested self-portraits were born.
Andy wanted his self-portrait on easels there as the auteur, producer, director, whatever. He gave me the acetates for a silk screen for a self-portrait and wanted me to make them. Why? Because it was cheaper and easier. And he said I could have one, and I said, how about the people that helped me to architect this event? And he asked how many there were, something like a half a dozen. So he said, fine, make it for them and give me back the silk screens.
At this time, it was commonplace for Andy to trade his art for anything he needed but couldn't afford. He certainly had enough of it.
This is about how they would trade paintings, two silkscreen flower paintings for legal bills and contracts for the Velvet Underground. So everything, this is something completely normal for Warhol, that he would barter for things. You know, he traded a painting for Billy Name's dental bill, he traded for legal bills, he traded for the video equipment. When he was trading flower paintings for legal work, he valued it $250 a painting.
Andy, I think, liked to feel that he was printing his own currency. He could make these prints or silk screens, what have you, and they were like currency. I mean, he could get his photographic stuff, he could get all kinds of things with his work. This is a kind of rather primitive form of barter, which I think appealed to him.
This is the actual video equipment Andy received in exchange for the self-portraits. 8 self-portraits in exchange for the first ever domestic video recorder and player, as seen here in this rare piece of film, was one of Andy's better deals.
In US dollars today, that equipment would have been worth $50,000 or $60,000. He had it for unlimited use. We got him all these videotapes. At that time, if his self-portrait sold for, I don't know what it would have been, but not very much. So the edge was on his side, not our side, on my side. He was getting the best of the deal in those dollars, in those days, I believe.
Andy accepted it as one of his, and he gave it in exchange. He said, you can keep the paintings in exchange for doing the party. The party was a wonderful success for Andy because he got a half a page in the Herald Tribune. This is what we live for, to get in the newspapers. They have Andy in movies all the time, and he's always giving a party. Well, he never gave a party in his life, but he went to everybody else's party to get his name in the paper. He didn't enjoy parties. He didn't drink, he didn't take drugs, and he didn't dance, and he didn't have anything to say. He was the ultimate wallflower, but it was work.
When he saw these afterwards, he was happy to corroborate them.
Yes, I think he was delighted with our whole arrangement. Getting the equipment, having this underground party under the Waldorf Astoria, having an article in our magazine about making videos. He was delighted with everything. I wasn't looking to make any money from this exchange. I never sold one of these. The few that we made, I gave to these people who helped make this event possible. I've never tried to profit from that relationship. And if somebody says that it's not real, I know what I am, who I am, and what it is, so there's no issue there, as far as I'm concerned, other than being right and history being recognized.
Things were looking good for Joe Simon. He traced his picture's origins, which seemed legitimate enough in terms of Warhol's practice of trading art for goods, and had a number of people willing to testify to the deal. He even found evidence of the party.
I looked through all the newspaper microfilm fish for the newspapers, finally found this piece from the New York, the Herald Tribune, and it took me a long time to find this, and there it is, all about the party, all about the video
underground
art.
party that was.
With Andy and Edie and Richard Extract. There were big screens with the video art that he made using Extract's cameras, with the paintings all around. So I had that. And one thing led to another, but I'd spent a lot of time in New York sleuthing. It was one thing after another. It was really, I became a detective.
But in the early 60s, it was unusual for Warhol to have his art made off-site and not supervised at all in its production. A point the Authentication Board clings to.
We have the information directly from the print shop that printed these things. There was no contact between Warhol at all and the print shop. There was no supervision, no direction, no nothing between Warhol and the print shop. If someone can show the board that Andy Warhol intended to create a work this way by handing somebody an acetate, and then 6 months later seeing 6, 7, 8 works, self-portraits, that he intended that those be his work, well, fine, but we have no evidence of that. Zero evidence of that.
No,
that
but
Andy
he
Warhol was happy to have it go out to some printing company that he never heard of in New Jersey, to have the silk screens made up out there, to never see the silk screens again. That's not the way the Warhol worked.
It was his idea, wasn't mine. I don't think he walked around handing his silk screen, the acetates for his silk screens to strangers and say, here, make this for yourself. He was too smart for that.
That's not the way the Warhol worked. Warhol got the silk screens back and created the work in his studio, in his factory, from the silk screens.
He did, but he didn't uniformly do that. That wasn't uniformly his way of working, or
I don't
uniquely
know that.
his way of working.
I don't know that. With self-portraits, it was.
This silk screen was made on the understanding by me and Richard Extract that it would be silk screens of Andy's that were done at a silk screen factory and used for a party. And after the party was over, the silk screen would be returned to Andy, and he would use it to make further silk screens, which he did, under different circumstances, but not so different.
These are Andy's own versions of his self-portrait, made from the same silk screen. The board rightly points